This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, if you or your family has lived in a neighborhood for generations, it would be really, really nice if you didn't get priced out the moment good things start to happen on your block. That was happening in Lawrenceville. It still is. But one way local residents found to at least slow it down is inclusionary zoning. If you tuned in yesterday, this might sound familiar. There are two really big competing proposals to expand inclusionary zoning all over the city, but they come at it in wildly different ways. So on today's show, we're taking a look at how inclusionary zoning already works in Lawrenceville and why at least one neighborhood group thinks the city's next move should be very, very clear. It's Wednesday, January 15th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. Dave Bringen is the executive director of Lawrenceville United. Dave, welcome. How would you describe what you do over there?
We are a grassroots nonprofit organization that was founded in 2001 to improve and protect quality of life for all Lawrenceville residents. So basically, we're the neighborhood organization that works to make Lawrenceville a great place to live for everybody. And underneath that, we do everything from running the Lawrenceville Farmers Market. We do a Friday food distribution. We support a couple community gardens in the neighborhood. We provide direct support to folks through home repairs and emergency needs. We work to improve our green spaces, our parks, our tree canopy, our infrastructure. We work with older adults. We do public safety, and we work with the Lawrenceville Corporation on community planning and community development, among other things as well.
Yeah, and you personally, you kind of get to be like head cheerleader for all of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's never a dull moment in this office, that's for sure.
What do you think people are getting the most wrong about how we're talking about affordable housing and especially this concept of inclusionary zoning right now? Because you have lived and breathed it for the last 5 years.
Yes. I think there's a lot of conversation lately about the role of new housing production in keeping housing prices from inflating too much. So
like building new developments, that kind of thing.
To keep up with demand. And, in my view, the question of whether our housing supply is keeping up with demand is a really important one. But I think the way it's being talked about does obscure some of the biggest challenge that Pittsburgh is grappling with when it comes to our housing crisis.
What are, to your mind, Pittsburgh's biggest challenges?
Yeah, Pittsburgh is one of the most segregated cities in America, right? And we have a housing crisis in Pittsburgh. Certainly, this affects our neighborhood. That's decimating our lower income households in our city. And that's disproportionately our Black neighbors, are disproportionately school-aged children of our city, and especially those who belong to a single-parent household. So while it's important that we talk about how our city's policies encourage or stifle the housing that we need to respond to increased demand, I think we also really need intentional strategies to make sure that everybody can access our 90 neighborhoods and that the folks who made the city what it is aren't left behind when it starts changing.
Lawrenceville instituted this inclusionary zoning policy, the one that y'all have in 2019. How would you describe the housing situation, I guess, over there in the neighborhood at that point in time?
in some ways, like, Lawrenceville's been a victim of its own success. You know, for years, neighbors fought to reduce crime, to turn blighted properties into community assets, to...
And we're kind of talking about like the early 2000s to like kind of mid 2010s, I think, at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And investing in our small business district, improving our streets and our schools, developing all kinds of programs that, you know, build community connections and make neighbors like have a really strong sense of community. And
it worked. Lawrenceville got really popular and really hip. And a lot of people could not afford to be there anymore.
Exactly. People wanted to live here, which is great, but what that meant is that housing prices started to really go up. In the decade that ended in 2019, we saw the second highest housing price appreciation of any zip code in America. So the result of that was that it priced out many of our neighbors. We lost 68% of our Black population between 2010 and 2020, 61% of our housing choice voucher households in just 5 years, 38% loss of our kids under 18 in just 5 years.
Wow.
We know are the demographic that was facing eviction the most. For me personally, I watched hundreds of our small Bantu neighbors get displaced from the neighborhood. And we know it also affected homeowners too. Speculation started really picking up in the neighborhood. And
you mean people literally knocking on doors being like, can I buy your house?
Absolutely. Yeah. And using really predatory practices to acquire what is valuable real estate. Right. So we even saw a loss of 31% of our longtime homeowners in just a couple of years.
But since that big jump in appreciation since 2019, you've had inclusionary zoning as one way to address the lack of space in the neighborhood. How do you explain to people what inclusionary zoning is? Because I feel like it's a couple of really big words that I think sort of intimidate people sometimes.
Yeah, it's a simple concept. It sounds wonky, but it's a simple concept, right? It's that as new private housing development is coming into neighborhoods, inclusionary zoning either incentivizes or mandates that a percentage of the units in new housing projects have to be priced affordably for lower income households.
Which means that the rent basically is capped at a certain level so that if you make less than that level, then there are other mechanisms in play like housing authority vouchers, things like that will cover the rest of your rent.
That's correct. Yeah. So to give an example, a 100 unit project in Lawrenceville under the existing inclusionary zoning policy, 10% of those units, so 10 of those units would have to be priced below 50% of area median income, which is, for a family of three is about an annual income of $45,000 per year. And the rent would have to be priced such that that family is not paying more than 30% of their income towards that rent. So that's how it works in a nutshell. Our policy is great. You mentioned vouchers. We know that the housing need is really at the lowest income ranges. One thing that we all should be really proud about with our inclusionary zoning policy is that it really has an incentive to get deep affordability too. So developers can actually exceed the allowable pricing if they are accepting a housing choice voucher.
When you say exceed, you mean it can be a higher value unit paying a lower rent, right?
That's right. The allowable pricing, for example, for a one bedroom unit might be $949. That's what it would be under inclusionary zoning. But if you're accepting a voucher, it could actually go beyond that amount as long as the tenant is not paying more than 30% of their income.
Yeah, it caps what the renter has to pay, but the developer or property holder may be able to collect a little bit more in rent.
That's right. And we've seen that to be really effective here in Lawrenceville. Most of the units that have been, most of the projects that have come under inclusionary zoning, the developer has agreed to accept housing choice vouchers. So it's a win-win, right? We get deep affordability where the need is really greatest, and the developer, has an offset too. The whole point of a housing choice voucher, as the name implies, is to provide choice, and unfortunately today, many of those vouchers are segregated and you don't see a lot of them in neighborhoods like Lawrenceville. So bringing that back, is one way to really encourage choice and make sure folks have access to all kinds of different neighborhoods.
Is there any difference between an inclusionary unit and any other unit that might be built in a building?
No, the policy requires them to be the same.
So same materials, same outfitted the same way, same appliances, that kind of thing?
That's right. Even the same sizes. So, to make sure that we're getting a diversity of unit sizes too that reflects the diversity of the market rate units. So that, in other words, so we're not just getting all studios for the affordable units. if there's a mix of 3s, 2s, 1-bedrooms in the project, we want to make sure the affordable units also have a mix of the unit types too.
Well, so tell me about the developer side of all of this. As they're looking for land for a good place to put up a complex, there's so many considerations, right?
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
you find that it was an incentive or a disincentive to build in Lawrenceville because of this inclusionary zoning requirement?
Well, I guess just to go back to the policy, developers were very much at the table when it was being created. The city, out of that housing needs assessment, created an exploratory committee to make a policy that responded to Pittsburgh's, particular market. And they brought developers, both nonprofit and for-profit developers, banking institutions, housing advocates, people on the ground. All of them came together and worked with the national organization to really model, what could an inclusionary zoning policy look like here in Pittsburgh. So that was kind of the technical piece of it. That helped create the policy. We were kind of doing the organizing to make sure that it's going to happen in Lawrenceville and to say, we want to go. we need this.
Yeah. So you didn't have to tell anybody that these are the rules you now have to play by. They kind of already knew the score. And if they were coming to Lawrenceville, they were on board.
Well, that's one of the great values of inclusionary zoning is that it provides really clear expectations for developers about how to go about development so that it's not changing neighborhood, project by project, neighborhood by neighborhood. It provides a level of clarity and consistency of if you're doing, a project over 20 units, 10% of them have to be affordable. It spells out exactly what that means, what income ranges, what the units have to look like, how they have to be spread out across the building or the project. We also really support developers to help market the affordable units to folks who, are eager to get into affordable housing here in Lawrenceville. But in terms of, courting developers or getting their buy-in, we've had a lot of developers now who have moved forward since inclusionary zoning has been passed. And basically to a person, they've all said, yeah, of course, this is a reasonable thing. We want to give back to the community. We think this is important. And many other cities do this. So this is, while this is new to Pittsburgh, this is not new nationally. And most developers that do work in other cities, see it as sort of par for the course.
Today's show is sponsored by the Frick Pittsburgh Museum and Gardens and a new award-winning tour of their historic home, Clayton. It's called Gilded, Not Golden, and it's a new spin on the old Frick family stories. Yes, you're going to learn about the mansion in Pittsburgh's historic Millionaire's Row. But this tour is not about oohing and eyeing over the possessions of a man who really famously, really notoriously, played a very big role in the Homestead riots and the birth of the entire American labor movement. It gives you more than that, the complexities of the man, his wealth, and exactly where it came from. If you've taken a Clayton tour before, it's time to return, so docents can take you back to 1892, the year of the riots, the year someone tried to kill Henry Clay Frick, and the year he lost 2 of his own children. Plus more on his corporate legacy, wealth inequality, and Frick's lasting impact on our shared environment. History is complicated, and that's what the Frick wants to share with you. The Frick's new signature tour of Clayton, Gilded, Not Golden, opens for the season on January 16th. Get your tickets and learn more at thefrickpittsburgh.org.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Go to Blinds.com for 40% off site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So Dave, you've had inclusionary zoning there in the neighborhood for 5 years now. And I know you've been really carefully tracking all these projects. Based on your data, do you think it's working? Because there is a study floating around that I know you know about suggesting inclusionary zoning did not, in fact, work in Lawrenceville.
Yeah, that study is not good. the data that it's based on is not accurate.
If you want to look it up, it's the advocacy group Pro Housing Pittsburgh. They did a study on this and found that the housing construction in Lawrenceville, according to them, dropped by 32% since inclusionary zoning was implemented. So they were looking at like the 5 years before inclusionary zoning, 12 to 19, and then the 5 years after, 19 to 24. But Dave, you said they counted wrong.
Yeah, I mean, just to put to give you a concrete example of how bad the data is there, their data was based on, their data set has 8 projects in Lawrenceville. When I looked at those 8 projects, 2 of them were double counted. They missed 5 projects and got the unit counts wrong on 2 or more. For a data set of 8, that's not a small correction. That is, the data is like completely misleading and off by, a really significant margin. We're going to actually be putting out some more data on the track record in Lawrenceville, and folks can see it for themselves. But they also, compare to other neighborhoods too. And, I don't know all the housing projects that happen in those neighborhoods, but just by, the data set in Lawrenceville, there's some really glaring errors in the way that they're going about collecting their data. So that does not inspire confidence for the other neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, they also looked at the Strip District and the South Side for the same period. They don't have inclusionary zoning policies, so they were looking at them as like a potential comparison point. I do think it's funny to try to compare any neighborhood apples to apples in Pittsburgh just because they are so wildly different. Their housing markets, their entertainment districts, the amount of available land, for example, like Lawrenceville and Southside don't have big blocks of land the way the Strip District did.
Also, by the way, we had a pandemic in 2020 where we really had a construction moratorium. Like construction costs went through the roof, insurance costs went up. We had a lot of disruptions, and what we see, as I just shared, is like people still want to build in Lawrenceville, and they're building more housing and getting entitled to build more housing at a clip far exceeding prior to inclusionary zoning.
But all of that said, like, we're not just picking on Pro Housing Pittsburgh. The reason why this study and its data is really important is because it's being used as an example with our lawmakers for why these policies do or don't work. And this study says they don't. But the study, you argue, is not correct and should not be the example that maybe they're trying to make it.
No, I think it's not a serious, it's presented as, research or whatever, but I don't think it's serious. I mean, I talked to multiple economists who do this work for a living. They told me it was gibberish. It's unfortunate. I think we should be data driven. We should be analyzing the effects of, it is important to get an inclusionary zoning policy right, in my view. A lot of care and intention went into this one to make sure it gets the results we want. So it is frustrating to, have to correct the record and have a lot of misinformation out there, which seems to be really motivated by, hostility towards this policy rather than a fair reckoning of its outcomes.
So, yeah, tell us your version then. How do you reckon Lawrenceville's success over this 5-year period?
Yeah, so here in Lawrenceville, IZ is on track to create 116 affordable units. 35 of those units are already occupied, have people living in them. Another 32 are under construction right now. Another 49 are fully entitled and waiting to break ground. If you look at the time frame between 2012 and 2019, we only entitled 44 units of affordable housing, which was a much longer time frame than, the one I just mentioned.
So you were saying, so that's 44 before inclusionary zoning affordable units and 116 after.
That's right. In projects of 20 units or more.
Right. Which is what the policy is applicable for.
That's right. So we're basically outpacing our previous affordable housing production by over 200% per year. But we're also seeing an increase in our overall housing units get produced too.
So not just, quote unquote, affordable, but, the number of like market rate units that are coming online as well.
That's correct. Yes.
So council is now considering making it citywide to some extent. There's these two separate and very different proposals, one from Mayor Ed Gainey, one from Southside Councilor Bob Charland. Do you have a favorite up to this point?
Yeah, well, Mayor Gainey's legislation, builds on the existing inclusionary zoning policy, which, again, I really stress a lot of care and intention and studies went into it to create it and is working well. It makes some amendments to our existing policy as it goes citywide to, offer a few more offsets to the developer to make sure that projects will pencil and that these projects can move forward, all of which I think is good. Councilman Charland's ordinance, by contrast, really had no studies behind it. I would not describe it as inclusionary zoning. The income targets, for example, like any market rate project in the city of Pittsburgh would qualify as affordable under the way those income thresholds are determined. Meaning, like, basically any market rate project would be inclusionary by this definition. So developer would not have to change anything about what a just 100% market rate project would be. And that would still be called an inclusionary project, right? And they would get all kinds of benefits for that. Density bonuses, fast tracking through the permitting process. We should have a conversation about what the value of those things are, but that's not inclusionary zoning. It's not creating a mix of housing types for different incomes. That is what the goal of inclusionary zoning is to ensure that as we're, creating new housing, that we're providing it for the folks who have most suffered from our affordable housing crisis in the city of Pittsburgh. And Councilman Charland's ordinance does not address that need at all.
If folks listened to our show yesterday, they would have heard us talk about these two proposals with a little more depth. So again, if you have not listened to that, we really hope you'll go back and check it out. But there are a couple other big differences we wanted to make sure folks understood. Mayor Gainey's plan would change city policy for a very long time. 99 years. Our current requirement, if you agree to build in a neighborhood with inclusionary zoning, is 35 years. As a developer, that means you're agreeing to offer affordable rents for at least that long. But Councilman Bob Charland, his plan would shorten that promise to just 20 years. And then there's this other idea that our guest yesterday pointed out that I know you specifically wanted to speak to. Julia said Gainey proposes that the developer have to pay for inclusionary zoning. Developer pays. Charland is proposing that the city subsidize all the affordable units. But explain that for us.
Well, this frustrates me because what I want to make clear is that the city of Pittsburgh is already providing a subsidy and an offset to inclusionary zoning.
Which includes those voucher programs through the Housing Authority.
Well, that's one way that it's sort of alleviated too. But the main way is through a tax abatement. A couple years ago, along with the creation of the inclusionary zoning program, the city of Pittsburgh, retooled its tax abatement programs, which, is in effect a subsidy, and linked it to the affordability metrics that are in inclusionary zoning and made it higher. So in other words, property owners that are complying with inclusionary zoning will get a by right tax abatement from the city up to $250,000 per year for 10 years. So we already do have skin in the game. The city is already providing, an offset to the mandate of inclusionary zoning. So the idea that we're putting all of the cost on the developer is just not true.
Yeah. But so this isn't new money that the city has to come up with. This is something we already do. There's
no risk here. We're not this isn't money coming out of the general funds. These are abating the increase in property taxes because the property is getting redeveloped and is more valuable.
And Councilman Charland, he also wants each neighborhood to be able to choose for itself whether they want to be subject to these policies. Gainey's, however, would be citywide. Which makes more sense to you? Do you think neighborhoods should choose?
I do think a citywide inclusionary zoning policy is the way to go. First of all, not every, neighborhood has the capacity to do a whole organizing campaign the way Lawrenceville did. And we should have consistent rules, across the city of Pittsburgh. It shouldn't be one way to develop in Lawrenceville in a different way in the Strip District and a completely different way in Hazelwood. Providing consistency and clarity ensures that the rules are straightforward and easy to follow. That's good for everybody. Mm-hmm. Why would we not want to extend this and make sure every neighborhood can benefit? If new housing is going to be created, that, we're creating affordable housing there too.
Yeah. And I think we also, sometimes this gets lost in how we talk about this. I think we should also note that inclusionary zoning is one way to approach the housing crisis in Pittsburgh. Even if it were to be widespread tomorrow, it's still not going to solve things. It's just an incentive for developers to bring a few more units online a little faster than they might have otherwise come.
That's right. I mean, we have a long ways to go to really dig out out of our housing crisis. It's just one tool in the toolbox, but we should be, as a city, we should be building housing for everybody. If we want to create a Pittsburgh for all, we need to create housing for all. Our neighborhoods are made great by having a diversity of people, and we should be working to make sure that everybody can enjoy the benefits of a growing Pittsburgh, and that everybody can access all neighborhoods.
Dave, thank you as always.
Thanks, Megan.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If you want to keep up with the latest updates on inclusionary zoning and maybe give a little input yourself, the City Planning Commission is going to be discussing Mayor Gainey and Councilman Charlin's plans on Tuesday, January 28th. The meeting starts at 2 p.m. You can tune in virtually, show up in person downtown, and you can even give testimony if the spirit moves you. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Talk to you again soon. So are you going to go to the City Planning Commission meeting?
I will unfortunately not physically. I will be there virtually. Let me put it that way. It was unfortunately scheduled for while I'm on vacation.
I'm glad you're drawing a line, though. That's a nice mental health boundary to be
the plane ticket was already booked, and my family would be very upset with me if I did feel the tug, though. I'm going to be honest with you. I've never thought so hard about canceling an entire trip as I have about this one.